Hello and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's review for Identity Crisis, which is episode 18 of season 4 of Star Trek Next Generation. This video is a part of a series of videos where I review episodes of Star Trek Next Generation, one episode at a time. In this video I cover Identity Crisis. So Identity Crisis is the episode where Geordi meets up with a longtime friend who he used to be a crewmate with, Lieutenant Commander Lighton, and they meet up because members of the away team that they went to on this planet start disappearing and returning to the planet. They try in vain to stop one of them from going to the planet in a shuttlecraft, but has the shuttlecraft is in fact destroyed in orbit. And so they're trying to discover why it is that these other members of the away team feel compelled to return to this planet. And Geordi and Lighton are the only two left on that away team who haven't disappeared. And as they monitor each other, Lighton gets obsessed with going to the planet, and that's all she can think about. And Geordi tries to stop her, and she gets very agitated and eventually starts transforming into another being. Crusher is then able to determine that there's a parasite that the away team picked up that is causing them to change into this other alien. And then Geordi, while he's investigating the disappearances, transforms into an alien himself and returns to the planet. Now Lighton is cured by Crusher, but LaForge is lost on the planet, so Lighton beams down with the away team in order to coax Geordi back in the ship, and she does, and they're able to return him to a human before it's too late. However, the other crew members, it was too late for them, and they can no longer be saved. So Picard puts warning buoys in orbit to prevent anyone else from going there. So I mentioned before, I think a while ago when I first started season 4, that I never really liked season 4 as much. Which I think is kind of funny because I watched what Michael Piller and other people involved with the show said that they thought season 4 improved over season 3. They thought it was a vast improvement and the show got better and we really caught our footing, because they did talk about how season 3 was really hectic and they were constantly running out of time and writing scripts at the last moment, whereas season 4 seemed to be the first season where they actually had the groove and were comfortable and all the writing team got along and stuff like that. But I actually think season 3 was way better than season 4. And I've watched a couple of reviews recently that actually shared that opinion, that said that season 4 feels like a sophomore slump after the much better season 3. And I'm mentioning this now because I mentioned before how I just have this, whenever I think of season 4, I just think of mediocrity, like a lot of mediocre, boring episodes. And I mentioned before that one episode in particular comes to mind every time I think of season 4, and it makes me think it's mediocre, and that is in fact this episode, Identity Crisis. Whenever I think of season 4, this is the first episode that comes to mind. I'm like, yeah, what a mediocre, forgettable episode. So it's a mediocre, forgettable season. Which isn't true, because there's some great episodes this season, like Reunion, Clues, and the Drumhead, and the Wounded too. But not to mention Best of Both Worlds Part 2. But I don't know, when I think the majority of episodes, I think are kind of forgettable. Like this one, like there's kind of a slump in this part of season 4, because you had Night Terrors, then this episode, then the Nth Degree, which I think are all kind of forgettable, and you had other forgettable episodes like Devil's Due. But this episode in particular I always thought of as the pinnacle of mediocrity. Now, I mentioned this in my last video I did for Night Terrors, because a lot of the reviews I saw for these episodes preferred this episode over Night Terrors, but I actually prefer Night Terrors. They're both similar as in having like a horror-esque theme, and I actually think that's accomplished way better in Night Terrors than this episode. This is kind of like a body horror theme, which is something that Brennan Braga actually does a lot. This was the first script that Brennan Braga wrote by himself. I mean, he worked on Reunion, but that was with Ronald D. Moore. This is the first script he did by himself, and it was body horror. The other two episodes I can think of that Brennan Braga wrote that are also body horrors is Threshold over on Voyager and Extinction over on Enterprise. Both episodes are considered absolutely terrible, and anyone most involved with that episode thinks it's awful. So this is the only one out of those three which isn't considered a total failure. Yeah, I don't know. I just find this episode kind of dull. For one thing, I think the having Lieutenant Lighton or Suzanne Lighton, every time Geordi calls her Susanna, I think, oh, Susanna, don't you cry for me. But anyway, I don't know why. But I think it's an issue that she comes out of nowhere and is all of a sudden like a huge character, and the episode really focuses on her. I feel like it's unearned. And, I mean, they do have some scenes with her and Geordi sort of bonding and reminiscing about the past. Geordi does, she talks about how she used to give him advice on women, and she was like, oh, your advice was really that good, but Geordi's terrible with women. So I don't really get that. But, yeah, other than that, like, I never really cared about her, identified with her, and she sort of just became the main character and the main focus, like we're supposed to care about her. And this, I will say the premise, and it's kind of ironic because Brennan Braga admittedly had never seen the original series, because this episode does remind me a lot of an original series episode where they go to an outpost and everyone's vanished and nobody knows what happens, and it's some eerie shit that happened. I think of the Empath, but I'm sure there's more episodes of the original series that were like this. Operation Annihilate, maybe that was more of a colony than the outpost, but I think, wasn't this a colony too? I can't remember. But anyway, it was an eerie setup of they were investigating this missing colony, and then 5 years later the away team that investigated themselves go missing. But I guess what makes this episode boring for me is, partly because it moves so slow, but other part is it relies mostly on the character interaction between Geordi and Susanna, and I just was not interested. It didn't really sell me. It just seemed to be telling me out of nowhere all of a sudden, oh, this is Geordi's best friend, and there's this deep connection. I think the episode would have worked much better if it was a character that we know Geordi has a deep connection to, like Data, for example. But there were some good moments in this episode. A lot of people point to the holodeck scene, which I do agree was actually a good scene. There was a good use of the holodeck, how Geordi was, trying to find what was causing the shadow, and when you saw that weird figure that the holodeck brought up, it was effectively eerie. It was really eerie, but problem is that scene doesn't actually have any effect on the rest of the episode, because the fact that Geordi found this out didn't play into the ending, the resolution. It was mainly just Lightning or Crusher figuring out it's a parasite, and Lightning bringing me down to convince Geordi to come back up. So it didn't really have anything to do with anything, even though in itself it's a good scene. It's kind of inconsequential. And then my other big issue with this episode is why they let Geordi go off by himself when they know he's going to transform. And they do have this scene where Crusher and Picard are like, no, we think you should stay in sickbay. But LaForge, like, makes a passionate plea to, would you like to just sit around and do nothing when your friend's at stake and your life's at stake? Please let me investigate this. And to be honest, like, I understand why Picard would give him the okay and be like, okay, we'll let you investigate. And the caveat they give is, we'll have the computer read my vital signs. And did the computer alert fucking anyone when his vital signs, like, disappeared? No, it didn't. So that was obviously useless. And Beverly told Geordi to report to sickbay at the first sign of anything wrong, anything out of the ordinary, and he fucking doesn't do that, which is frustrating. It's not like he wants to transform, because at the moment he's actively investigating the transformation, but his hand shakes, just like freaking Commander Lighton's hand shook right before she started transforming, so that should have been the first sign. And then later on, when he's in the holodeck, he's starting to experience more symptoms, and he still does nothing. And it just makes me so frustrated with the character for being so stupid. But here's my bigger point: they shouldn't let Geordi go off on his own. Sure, let him go off and keep working, but they should have had Data chaperone him and be like, Data, you need to keep an eye on him. Like, that's what Geordi did for Commander Lighton. Like, she kept talking about going back to the planet and being all desperate, and Geordi wouldn't leave her alone and wouldn't let her leave. Why didn't they have Data do that? In fact, they have a scene where Data goes down to ask Geordi if he needs any help, and Geordi's like, no, I'm fine, I'll be fine by myself, which is not usually whenever there's a problem, especially a technical one, or they're doing any investigating, Geordi works with Data. So it seems to make no sense why Geordi would push him away. In fact, as I said, Picard should have made it a condition of Geordi not staying in sickbay that someone like Data has to be with him at all times. It was really reckless and careless to just let him go off by himself. Because if Data was with him, when Geordi's hand started shaking, Data would be like, you're going to sickbay right now. In fact, the fact that Geordi himself didn't make himself go to sickbay makes me very frustrated with the character. So it doesn't make any sense why they would let LaForge go off by himself like that. But the real reason, and the reason why, so the episode can happen. You guys need like a bingo card or whatever, as the sayings I say all the time, according to Stephen Kennedy mentioned in a different episode of the Patreon comments, how there's sayings that I say all the time, and that's one of them. Of course, I took that from Ryan George from the pitch meetings, but still, I mean, there's no other reason. It's contrived writing. That's all there is to it. And so that's really frustrating to me. But one thing another scene I really did like about this episode was when Data was talking to Dr. Crusher, and Data was investigating this transformation, and Dr. Crusher was talking about how he cared about Geordi, and he was doing it because he was his friend and didn't want to see anything happen to him, and Data kept denying it and being like, no, I feel no emotions or whatever, and Beverly just gives him this look like, come on. And then he eventually succumbs and is like, however, I am highly motivated to determine the cause of this phenomenon. So I like that. Like, as I said, I love, because Data is more than just a robot. He does have human qualities, and I love when the show explores those. And here, Data's actively trying to deny this side of him, and being like, "Oh, I feel no emotions." But it's very clear, like, he considers Geordi a good friend, and that he would be disturbed if anything happened to him. And so it was a nice little subtle scene there where he had to admit, I am highly motivated. But I wish there was more. There should have been more interactions between Data and Geordi. In fact, it should have been Data who talked Geordi down and not Commander Light. I think they should have gotten rid of this Commander Lighton character altogether. I didn't like her. They didn't develop her enough. She was just like, boom, there all of a sudden. And all of a sudden we're supposed to accept her as Geordi's best friend, and I don't. And for that matter, the ending scene where Geordi is like, where she's talking Geordi back, and Geordi's already transformed into this alien, which they made it clear, like, their instinct is to run away and hide and go back to the planet, and instinct overwhelms everything. So I totally don't buy that she was able to talk him down and talk him into coming back. Like, that was so fake and so contrived. And who the hell is this person? Like, I just don't buy it. Now, I've heard other people complain that why does Geordi all of a sudden have chemistry with another woman when he's been portrayed as so incredibly awkward around women. But I guess I could buy it since she was, he looked at her in a platonic way, and so he wouldn't get all awkward. And, but I hate how they did that to Geordi's character anyway. But yeah, that's aspect of the episode. Now, yes, the holodeck scene was creepy, finding it out, but I don't know. For me, I'm just not into this body horror stuff. I just don't find it interesting that he's Geordi turning into this monster or whatever. And I know they try to make up this excuse earlier in the episode with the dialogue saying, oh, everyone transforms at a different rate, or, some people more gradual, some people are faster, but I'm sorry. No, that doesn't excuse the fact that Geordi, transitioned like that. Like, it took Commander Lighton, several days, and LaForge just sneezed, and all of a sudden he's the creature. That's bullshit. I'm sorry. It just flat out is. Now, I heard other people compare him to, once he's the creature, the Predator. And I was like, what are you talking about? But then I realized what they're referring to is when he was, invisible. in that scene where he's in the transporter room, and it's just an invisible shimmering. And that is the similar effect what they use for the Predator when the Predator has this camouflage on. So I was like, okay, that's what they're referring to. But then, so there's a scene when he goes in the transporter room, and there's a transporter operator who calls security, and Geordi just pushes him and he flies across the room. And I was like, that guy looks very familiar. So then I remembered, because I recently watched a video on the Deep Space Nine episode, The Adversary. And that episode, there's a security officer who's paired up with Cisco while they're searching for a changeling, and the changeling turns into a tentacle and grabs the dude by the neck and tosses him across the room. You gotta assume that the dude's dead, that that the changeling broke his neck. But that's the same actor, and I was like, oh, that's where I recognize him from. And I thought about this, and because this episode and The Adversary were shot pretty far apart, so I was several years. So I was like, I bet you this is the stunt coordinator. That does, because I know that Next Gen DS9 and Voyager had the same stunt coordinator. So I was like, I bet you every once in a while he'll do acting roles because it involves stunts. And both of these roles I'm thinking of involve stunts. One was Geordi shoving him flying across the room, and the other is the changeling wrapping around, flinging him across the room. And so I looked it up, and sure enough, it was in fact the stunt coordinator. I thought that was the same actor, but yeah, it's the stunt coordinator. And apparently, I looked up his credits, the acting credits, and he's apparently has a lot of appearances where he just plays random people who do stunts. Dennis Madalone, I believe his name is. But anyway, it's just thought that was interesting and something worth pointing out. But other than that, also want to talk about Nurse Ogawa. I mentioned her before in Future Imperfect. And then, what was the other? There was another episode that she appeared in where they first said her name is Alyssa. But she's, I think this is the third episode she appears in. She, of course, will become a recurring character. Particularly in the 7th season, she gets a lot more screen time. And I don't know, do they call her Ogawa in this episode? I can't remember. But she's actually quite prominent in this episode as she helps Beverly deal with Commander Layton. So I must have only talked about her in Revisited, because the first episode she appeared in was Future Imperfect and the second was Clues. Both of those episodes I did Revisited for, so I probably didn't talk about her yet in my main channel. So yeah, so it was Future Imperfect, Clues, this episode, and then The Host is the other one for season 4. But then she appears in like how many episodes? 5 episodes in season 5, 3 episodes in season 6. I thought it was more than 3. And only 4 episodes in season 7. I thought she appeared a lot more, but she has a lot more to do in season 7. Like in Parallel, she's the doctor in a parallel universe, and Lower Deck, she's one of the main characters. Genesis, she turns into an ape and is shown to be pregnant and all good things. She loses her baby when the temporal anomaly thingy. So even though there's only 4 episodes in season 7, she appears a lot more. But anyway, the 4 episodes she appeared in season 4, she barely appeared in. Yeah, I know that Clues was the first time they mentioned her name, Alyssa, because Beverly asked her, "Did you mess with my plants?" And she's like, "No, of course not. What the hell are you talking about?" But I don't remember if she was named in this episode or not. So, yeah, that's pretty much all I have to say about this episode. I don't really have that much to say about it. I think it's pretty boring and unremarkable, if I'm being totally honest. So I would like to thank my Patreon supporters for supporting me on Patreon. Is very much appreciated. So I'll give a very special thanks to Brandon Neal Howells. Thank you so much for your very strong support of my channel. It's very much appreciated. And I also would like to give a shout out to Antarius, Greg Marley, Francisco Chuck Hooks, Kyrie091, Anthony D. Benedictus, Ricky, Manny Jester, Joel Lavals, Alessandro Magalacio, Norman Buckwald, Stephen Kennedy, Britton Berg, and Allison Fordyce. Thank you all so very much for your support. So do have a few Patreon comments for this episode. First comment is from Kyrie091, who says, "Identity crisis, more like Jordy ain't the nicest. For real, I love this episode. I like the mystery plot of trying to figure out what's going on, discovering the weird shadow, and so on. Jordy episode, probably my favorite Jordy episode. Way better than Booty Crap." Yeah, I remember when you requested the favorite centric episode of each character from TNG, you did mention that Identity Crisis was your favorite Jordy episode. It's not mine. I'm sorry. For me, I chose The Mind's Eye. I think that's a way better Jordy episode. Arguably, he's not in that episode as much as this one, but it's just such a better episode, in my humble opinion, of course. Anyway, next comment is from Stephen Kennedy, who says, "This may be the 3rd episode of TNG that I saw. I know I didn't see the whole episode the first time around. I may have missed the first 10 minutes. I would have liked to see more Susanna Layton, and I really enjoyed the scene in 10 Forward with Geordi. My rating is 7. At least Geordi used the holodeck for a good reason this time out of 10. So next comment is from Antarius, who says, "Somehow I never liked episodes with mutations like this. Many because of bad episodes like Threshold on Voyager or Genesis in the 7th season of TNG. I simply can't believe the sudden transformations that happen in both directions. The human body wouldn't survive this. Why does this transformation happen years after the mission, and why does the away team make this video? We have never seen this procedure ever before in future episodes. This is just because of plot. Until the mystery is solved, the episode is quite suspenseful, but after that, some scenes nearly drag. Especially the long scene on the holodeck. I like the visual and audio design of the alien planet. My rating is 6 out of 10. Yeah, I don't really like the mutation episodes either. Although I do like Genesis. And I will say something bold. I think Genesis is a better episode than this one. At least that's like scary. Even though it is a bit sillier by, you gotta admit. But I don't know. I always thought it was a better episode. Oh, and there is something else I wanted to mention that I've heard people question the practicality of this alien, because apparently they said these weird aliens, the way they reproduce is by infecting others and turning them into themselves. And they done that to, so a bunch of humans or humanoids, Federation citizens, tried to colonize this planet, and they all got turned into aliens. And then the away team came by and went to investigate, and they got turned into aliens. And so I heard several people suggest that when Picard puts up the warning buoys that he's committing genocide. He's, condemning these aliens to death. And here's the thing. I don't see anything wrong with that. This is let me put it to you this way. If these were the xenomorphs from Aliens, you don't really see as a bad thing by, nuking the colony that they're on and killing them all, because they're vicious creatures. And these are just parasites that abduct and transform and basically hijacking their whole lives. This one dude was married with 2 kids, and their family will never see him again because of that stupid fucking alien virus. So these are vicious things, and if you want to kill them, they don't even kill them all. They just condemn them to being not stealing any more people. So I see absolutely nothing wrong with this, because these are parasitic beings that shouldn't be allowed to keep stealing people and hijacking their lives like this. But you know what? When I was thinking about it, I think that these creatures must have existed and other creatures that weren't humanoid, because how would if there's no humanoid life on this planet? Unless there was humanoid life, but the whole way they reproduce, apparently they don't reproduce sexually. They reproduce by infecting other people and turning them into themselves. So they must be able to do that with animal life. And the only way this will make sense to me is that normally that they would affect animals on the planet, but it just so happens that it works on humanoids too, and so it only makes sense if the original form of these aliens were not humanoid. They just adapted to infect humanoids as well, because otherwise how the fuck can they exist? They can't be dependent on people from other worlds coming to this world, because that's not how life develops on a planet. That doesn't make any fucking sense. So the only way I can square this is that they used to live off of infecting other animals like birds or maybe monkeys or pigs or something like that. But the real reason is it's just contrived writing and an excuse to have a monster body horror episode, basically. Anyway, Next comment is from Maddie Jester, who says, I like this episode. It's an idea that Trek has done a few times, and while rewatching this, I thought of that crappy Enterprise episode Extinction, which coincidentally was directed by LeVar Burton. But this one does a much better job. It's a good Geordi episode, and I find the mystery-solving aspect interesting, especially when he figures out there are hidden life forms using the holodeck. A creepy moment that was indeed, although it's a shame we didn't get to see Commander Lighton again. I thought she worked well with Geordi and would have been a decent recurring character. Altogether, a strong episode for me, and I'm giving it a solid 8 out of 10. Yeah, LeVar Burton's really spoke up against the episode Extinction. I think he said he was embarrassed to work on it and thought it was absolutely terrible. Anyway, next comment is from Norman Buchwald, who says, as I mentioned before, the fourth season seemed to be saturated with what I call Twilight Zone episodes, like Remember Me and Clues. Maybe the problem here was the author, Brennan Braga, but we are given a backstory of Geordi's previous ship and a mysterious mission, only to have any bond with Susanna. I think she was his former captain, who we'll only see in this episode. Well, I gotta correct you there. She wasn't a captain. She was just a lieutenant commander. So I think she was higher up on the chain than he was, but she wasn't the captain. But anyway, so the potential for developing characters is here, but not really done well, since we really do not know her and know even less of the others who became the shadow aliens. So there's not that much here. I have to admit that in the final scene, it may have made more of a touch of characters and their friends if Guinan or even Data was making their case to Geordi to return, or at least in a professional sense, Troy. Although up until now, there wasn't much between Geordi and Troy for the personal dynamics. The best part was when Geordi is trying to figure out what happened in the holodeck. Good touch of continuity and much more appropriate in the context compared to Booby Trap. The problem is that the eerie moments on the holodeck were undercut by effects with everything that happened after. How was Shadow Alien Geordi able to easily use the transporter, for example? And it may have been interesting if we had learned after Geordi could see more than ever with his visor as the shadow creature to even mix some disability themes into a potential intriguing episode. But otherwise, the story falls flat and is mainly meh to me. I give it 5 shadow aliens in the holodeck out of 10. Yeah, I don't buy that Lighton was the one able to talk Geordi out of it. I think Troy is actually a good idea, because then you actually see her doing her job properly. Like the fact that she might not connect with Geordi much, like the way she talked Worf down from killing himself in Night Terrors, which is something I've really praised that episode for. Like they could have done something similar with her and Geordi. I don't like the Lighton character. I don't think she jived. They didn't really do a very good job of introducing, and she just felt out of place. But that's just me. So anyway, last comment is from Brandon Neal Howells, who says, finally a good Geordi episode. I enjoy the cold open, flashback to the original mission. I love the dark, creepy feeling on Tarkin 3. Both the planet and the holodeck recreation thereof. Using the holodeck to solve a mystery is a great idea, and this is the best use of it so far, in my opinion. It's so refreshing to see Geordi acting relaxed with the woman instead of like stammering adolescent. I heard on the podcast that Susanna was meant to be a love interest for Geordi. I'm so very glad this idea was nixed. The away team transformed into nocturnal creatures impressed the hell out of me, but where is Deanna Troi when we need her? Would she be able to sense And how is it almost invisible Geordi able to transport down to Tarkian 3? If the computer and transporter can't read life signs in the away team when they're affected by the parasite. 7 ultraviolet lights out of 10. So that's the major question I have. If these people are being transformed into these aliens that completely act on instinct, which is how Susanna describes them, that they don't really have any thought, that there's more just instinct. That's another reason why I think they're supposed to exist as just animals, and they're being inhabited as humanoids is a new thing for them, because they're kind of really instinctual like animals. But anyway, how are they able to operate transporters and shuttlecrafts if they're completely transformed into these beings? I realize they have this very overpowering strong instinct to return to the planet, but operating a transporter, especially when Geordi transports down, he overrides the security lockout. How is he able to function like this if he's turned into this instinctual being? Like, I don't know. That just doesn't seem right to me. Like, I don't really buy that. And here's another question I had. So, how were they never really explained exactly how Geordi and Lighton's original away team was infected. Like, I assumed it was like in the air. Like, Geordi does see that shadow creature, and that was apparently there the whole time, so it could have like touched them and infected them that way. But I have a feeling it's in the air. But regardless, like, I was listening because I want there to be a line about why aren't they worried about Riker and Worf and Beverly going down to the planet with, like, unprotected. Like, even after they learn of this parasite, they don't even put hazmat suits on or anything. They just go down willy-nilly, unprotected. And I wanted a line of, like, oh, Beverly is saying something like, oh, we gotta inoculate. Because after she cured Commander Lighton, she should have been like, oh, we found the inoculation, the cure to stop the parasite dead, so we don't get infected, so I have to do that to everyone who is down on the planet. I wanted a fucking line like that. Because I mean, I can assume that something like that happened off screen, but I really wanted a line like that because it really bothered me how no one was concerned about the other people who were just beaming down to the planet without any fucking protection. Why weren't people worried about them becoming creatures and getting infected 5 years later? But, you know, whatever. Anyway, thank you so much, patrons, for your comments. So I think the comments were mostly positive. We had a couple of, I think, Antarius and Norman Buckwold were kind of lukewarm on this episode, and I'm honestly a lot closer to their positions. In fact, alright, so my rating for Identity Crisis out of 10 is a 4 poor. In fact, I started off wanting to give this episode a very weak 6, but then as I kept talking through and thinking about all the issues with the episode, I brought it down to a 5 in my mind. But the more I talked, I was like, no, this is actually a 4. I just have a lot of issues with this, and I think overall it's just dull and kind of boring. And I just don't like the body horror aspect of it. There's some things like, yes, the holodeck scene was good, but it's inconsequential. Like, it doesn't actually matter to the plot of the episode. And, it was creepy. Like, the concept is good, and the initial mystery was good of there being a colony that suddenly disappeared and then people starting to disappear. I just don't think how they executed with, like, Commander Lighton. I just never attached to this character, never cared about her. And I think this episode would have been much better if they relied on Troy and Data instead. Just my humble opinion. Anyway, so that is it for my review of Identity Crisis. So just looking at the schedule here, this Wednesday will be my review for the Nth Degree. another meh episode. Thursday, I'll be covering the new episode of Discovery. And then Saturday is May the 4th, so I'll be covering the next Star Wars movie. Do a different one every year, so this year will be Episode 2, Attack of the Clones. And then Monday is May 6th, which is my 10th anniversary. Enchantment of Eternity. 10 years since I made the first Enchantment of Eternity video. So I'll be doing a celebration. I'll be doing a live stream. I'll be doing a revamp of my top 50 favorite movies of all time. That's a series of videos I did when I first started my channel 10 years ago. So I'm updating that and doing it again in one video. And I'm re-releasing my review for Interstellar, which I recorded nearly 9 years ago, but I got copyrighted and I never bothered putting it back up, so I'm finally going to do that as part of this big anniversary special coming May 6th. Anyway, be sure to check out my channel for all that, and as I continue to cover Star Trek and many other shows as well, so be sure to subscribe so you can keep up with all of that. And thanks a lot for watching.